I always thought that if I ever left my life behind, it would be because of something grand, an adventure, a new beginning, a fresh start. But when I walked away 6 months ago, it wasn't for any of those reasons. It was because I had no other choice. You see, betrayal doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps in slowly, like water through a crack in the foundation. At first, it's just a suspicion, an uneasy feeling that something isn't right. Then, one day, the dam breaks, and you realize your entire life was built on a lie. That's what happened to me. I was married to Corinne for 7 years. 7 years of what I thought was love, trust, and partnership. But I was wrong. I still remember the moment I found out. It was an ordinary Tuesday night. I came home later than usual, tired but satisfied from a long day at work. I set my briefcase down, loosened my tie, and walked into the kitchen, expecting to see Corinne cooking or scrolling through her phone at the counter. But the house was silent. And then I saw it, her phone, left unattended on the dining table, the screen glowing with a notification. A message from a name I didn't recognize. Last night was incredible. I can still taste you. The floor might as well have cracked beneath me. I remember picking up the phone, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The messages, there were so many. Weeks, months of texts, photos, inside jokes, things she had never said to me. I felt sick. I waited. Hours passed, and when Corinne finally walked through the door, she greeted me with that same smile she always gave me, like nothing had changed. Like she hadn't just spent the night with another man. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I observed. I became an outsider in my own life, watching as she moved through our home, pretending to be the devoted wife. But every touch, every word, every laugh was a performance. And I wasn't buying it anymore. For weeks, I wrestled with what to do. Should I confront her? Should I fight for the marriage? Should I let her know just how deeply she had cut me? But in the end, I realized something. She didn't deserve a reaction. So I disappeared. No fights, no dramatic speeches. I packed a bag, emptied our joint account, left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter, and walked out of that house without a word. I left my job, changed my number, and drove until the past felt distant enough to breathe again. For 6 months, I was a ghost. No one knew where I had gone, and I liked it that way. I found a small town, a quiet apartment, and a job that paid just enough to keep me going. I didn't need much, just space, time, freedom from the woman who had torn my heart apart without a second thought. I thought she would move on. I thought she'd be too busy with her new lover to care. But I was wrong. She searched for me. She reached out to old friends, showed up at my old job in tears, posted messages online as if I was the one who had betrayed her. I ignored it all. I refused to let her pull me back into the mess she had created. But last night, that all changed. I had just come back from work, a quiet evening like any other. I was making a cup of coffee when I heard it, the knock at my door. At first, I thought it was my landlord or a neighbor. But when I looked through the peephole, my entire body went cold. It was her, Corinne, standing outside my door. Somehow, someway, she had found me. I didn't open the door. Not yet. I stood there, staring, my heart pounding in my chest. She knocked again. Then again. Then, Elliot, I know you're in there. Please, let me in. We need to talk. I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly. She had spent 6 months searching for me. Now, it was time for me to give her what she deserved. I stood there, frozen, my fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. The moment I had been avoiding, pretending wouldn't come, was now here, pounding on my door with the urgency of a woman desperate for answers. She had found me. For 6 months, I had lived in peace, or something like it. No accusations, no gaslighting, no waking up in the middle of the night questioning if I was imagining things. I had built a routine that didn't include her, a world where my thoughts weren't poisoned by her betrayal. And now, with just a few knocks, she was standing on the other side of the life I had created, trying to claw her way back in. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let her stand out there in the cold until she gave up. But Corinne wasn't the kind of woman to walk away easily. She was stubborn, persistent, and worst of all, she was an expert at pretending to care. Elliot, please, her voice cracked, but I knew better than to fall for it. I had heard that voice before, the one she used when she needed something, when she wanted to manipulate a situation in her favor. It was the same tone she had used when she convinced me to forgive her for smaller betrayals, the kind I hadn't even realized were warning signs at the time. I should have walked away from the door. But instead, I found myself standing there, my hand hovering over the lock. Not to let her in, but to make her face the silence she had created. She knocked again, harder this time. I know you're in there. I need to talk to you. Please. A bitter laugh almost escaped my lips. She needs to talk? Now, after all this time, after I had given her every opportunity to come clean, to fix things, to be honest? I leaned against the doorframe, still saying nothing. Silence was my only weapon now. Minutes passed. Maybe 5, maybe 10. I heard her shift, her weight moving from one foot to the other. I could imagine her standing there, arms wrapped around herself, rehearsing whatever speech she had planned. Elliot. I'm sorry. There it was. The word she thought would fix everything. The same word she had used the first time she was caught lying to me. And the second. And the third. But sorry had no meaning anymore. I could feel my heartbeat slow, my breathing steadying. I was in control. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I had the upper hand. And then, as if sensing my hesitation, she dropped the act. Her voice hardened. You can't just disappear like that. Oh, there it was. The real Corinne. The one who was always so sure that I would come running back no matter what she did. The woman who had spent years testing my patience, pushing boundaries, seeing how far she could go before I snapped. She had always assumed there was no line I wouldn't cross for her, no distance I wouldn't travel to keep our life together. She had been wrong, and she hated that. I finally spoke, my voice calm, steady. Go home, Corinne. There was a sharp inhale on the other side of the door. She hadn't expected that. Not anger. Not heartbreak, just indifference. For 6 months, she had been searching for the man who used to love her. The man who had once begged for an explanation, who had stayed up at night replaying every moment of their marriage, wondering where it had gone wrong. But that man no longer existed. All that was left was the silence between us. I turned away from the door. Let her stand there. Let her knock until her hands were sore. Let her feel what it was like to be ignored, to be the one left waiting for an answer that would never come. For once in her life, Corinne wouldn't get what she wanted, but she would get what she deserved. I didn't expect her to leave right away. Corinne had always been relentless, refusing to accept a reality she couldn't control. I could picture her standing on the other side of the door, her mind racing, trying to decide which approach would crack me open first. Would she play the victim, the apologetic wife? Or would she go straight to anger, twisting the story until she was the one wronged? I had seen it all before. And yet, I could feel the weight of her presence pressing against me. Even without opening the door, I knew exactly what was happening. She was pacing. Her nails were digging into the sleeves of her coat. Her lips were parted just slightly as she tried to steady her breath, rehearsing whatever version of the truth she thought I'd accept. Another knock. Not as forceful as the last, but persistent. Elliot, I know you're upset, she started, her voice softer, like she was speaking to a wounded animal rather than her husband, the man she had betrayed. But can we just talk? Please? You just vanished. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I bit back a laugh. What it did to her? The audacity was almost amusing. Almost. I leaned against the far wall of my apartment, running a hand down my face, willing myself to stay calm. But deep down, the anger simmered. This was classic Corinne, turning herself into the victim, as if I had somehow wronged her by walking away from her betrayal. I inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower. I wasn't that man anymore. The one who let her words twist his reality. She knocked again, this time more impatiently. I deserve answers, Elliot, she said, her voice hardening. Oh, there it was. The real Corinne, peeling through the carefully constructed mask. The one who always needed control, needed to hold the leash. I stepped closer to the door, my palm resting against the wood between us. You deserve answers? I said, my voice calm but firm. A sharp inhale from her. I could almost hear the calculations running through her head. I didn't, she started, but I cut her off. No, you don't get to start with that, I said. You don't get to knock on my door after 6 months and act like I'm the one who owes you something. Silence. Good. Let her sit with that. Let her feel even an ounce of what I had felt the night I walked away. You think disappearing was easy? I continued. You think I just packed a bag, hopped in a car, and never looked back? More silence. I could hear her shifting again, trying to decide if she should argue or let me speak. I didn't wait for her answer. I had to leave, Corinne, because I knew exactly how this would go. If I stayed, you would have given me excuses. You would have told me half-truths, twisted reality just enough to make me question everything. And I would have done what I always did, believed you. I paused. Because I wanted to believe you. The weight of those words settled between us. Then, just barely above a whisper, she spoke. I made a mistake. I let out a slow breath, staring at the ceiling. A mistake. I repeated, my voice hollow. That's what you call it? She exhaled shakily, and for a moment, I almost thought she might cry. If I didn't know her as well as I did, I might have even thought it was real. But I did know her. I swear, Elliot, I never meant. You never meant to get caught, I interrupted. Silence again. She swallowed, and I could almost hear her trying to steady herself, to regain control of the conversation. I spent 6 months looking for you, she said. I didn't know if you were okay. I needed to find you. There it was again. The need to control the narrative. The need to be the one to find me, to be the one to decide when the story ended. But she didn't get to have that power anymore. I stepped away from the door, running a hand through my hair, trying to think. What did I want from this? Closure? No, I had already found that. I wanted her to feel it. The helplessness. The uncertainty. For 6 months, I had lived with the weight of her betrayal, with the knowledge that the woman I had loved had looked me in the eyes, kissed me goodnight, and then gone to him. Now, for the first time, she didn't know what was going to happen next. And that was exactly where I wanted her. I exhaled slowly, steadying my voice. Go home, Corinne. No, she said immediately. I clenched my jaw. Of course she wouldn't make this easy. I need to talk to you, she insisted. Please, just let me in. Just for a minute. I'll leave if you want me to, but I need to see you. I need to explain. Explain? There was nothing left to explain. I had read every message, seen every lie. I knew everything. And yet, I hesitated. Not because I wanted to hear her excuses, but because I wanted to see her squirm. I wanted to look her in the eyes and see if she still thought she could manipulate me. I took one last breath. Then, without saying a word, I reached for the lock. The door clicked open, and the moment she saw me, her breath hitched. I didn't say anything. I just waited. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes scanning my face, searching for something: anger, sadness, regret. She looked smaller than I remembered, but maybe that was just because, for the first time, she wasn't the one in control. Elliot, she whispered. I tilted my head slightly. You wanted to talk? I said, my voice eerily calm. She nodded, but I could see the hesitation now, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Then talk. And just like that, she realized this wasn't going to go the way she planned. Not this time. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways, rehearsed every possible reaction I might have if Corinne ever found me. In some versions, I was furious, unleashing months of bottled-up rage and a storm of words that would finally make her understand the destruction she had caused. In others, I was cold, indifferent, the kind of man who could look through her as if she were a stranger. But standing here now, watching her shift nervously on my doorstep, I felt neither. There was no fire, no overwhelming need to break her down. There was just silence. She hesitated, her hands clenching at her sides like she wasn't sure whether to step forward or stay frozen in place. The Corinne I remembered was always sure of herself, always in control. But this woman, the one standing in front of me now, was uncertain. And that alone told me more than any words ever could. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over my chest. You wanted to talk. So talk. She swallowed, glancing around as if expecting someone else to save her from the conversation she had been so desperate to have. But there was no one. Just me. And her. Can I come in? She finally asked, her voice careful, like she was stepping onto unstable ground. I studied her for a moment. 6 months ago, I would have let her in without hesitation. 6 months ago, I would have been desperate to hear whatever excuse she had, searching for any reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't as bad as I thought. But 6 months ago, I was a different man. I shook my head slowly. No. You can say whatever you need to say from right there. She exhaled sharply, like she had expected that answer but still hated hearing it out loud. Elliot, please. I don't want to do this outside. I shrugged. Then don't. Her jaw tightened. I could see the frustration starting to bubble beneath the surface. Corinne had never done well when things didn't go her way. She liked control, liked being the one to dictate the terms of a conversation. Not this time. She ran a hand through her hair, and for the first time, I noticed how tired she looked. There were faint shadows under her eyes, the kind that only came from sleepless nights. It would have been easy to believe that maybe she had suffered too, that maybe the past 6 months hadn't been kind to her either. But I knew better than to let myself believe that. You disappeared, she said finally, her voice quieter now. I didn't know where you went, if you were okay. I thought. She trailed off, biting her lip like she wasn't sure if she should finish that sentence. I tilted my head. You thought what? She hesitated. Then, barely above a whisper, she admitted. I thought you were dead. I let those words sit between us for a moment. Part of me wondered if she really meant it. If, for even a second, she had genuinely believed that something terrible had happened to me. If she had pictured me in a ditch somewhere, another tragic story of a man who couldn't handle the weight of betrayal. And then I remembered who I was talking to. Corinne wasn't the kind of woman who grieved. She was the kind who regretted. Not because she had done something wrong, but because she had lost something she once owned. You thought I was dead, I repeated slowly, as if testing how the words tasted. And that bothered you? Her eyes snapped up to mine, and for the first time, I saw something flicker behind them, something real. Of course it bothered me, Elliot, she said, her voice suddenly sharp, almost angry. I looked for you everywhere. I called your family, your friends. I even went to your old job. No one knew where you were. You just disappeared. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah, that was kind of the point. She let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking her head. You don't get to just run away, Elliot. I straightened, my expression hardening. I don't. She hesitated. That's not what I meant. No, I said, my voice eerily calm. I think it's exactly what you meant. You don't like that I left, that I didn't sit around waiting for you to decide if I was still useful to you, that I didn't give you the chance to spin your story before I had the chance to walk away first. She clenched her jaw, and I knew I had hit the mark. I shook my head slowly, exhaling through my nose. You think you're the only one who suffered? I asked. You think I just vanished because I didn't feel like dealing with reality? She didn't answer. I took a step forward, closing the distance just slightly. I left because I knew how this would go. I knew you'd turn it around, make it about you. That's what you've always done, Corinne. I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. You lied to me. You betrayed me. And now you're standing here acting like I'm the one who abandoned you. She swallowed, her throat bobbing as she tried to find the right words. But for once, she didn't seem to have any. I ran a hand through my hair, letting out a slow, measured breath. I want you to leave, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. Her eyes widened slightly, like she hadn't expected me to shut this down so quickly. Elliot, please. Just let me explain. I let out a humorless chuckle. Explain what? That you cheated? That you lied every single day while pretending to be my wife? That you let me believe we were building something real while you were off? I stopped myself, shaking my head. No, I don't need you to explain any of that. I already know. Her lips parted, but whatever words she had planned to say never came. For the first time since I had opened the door, she looked lost, like the reality of this moment was finally sinking in. I waited to see if she would fight, if she would scream, if she would demand I listen to whatever excuse she had rehearsed on the way here. But she did none of those things. Instead, she just stood there, her hands trembling slightly at her sides, her gaze darting to the ground. And then, finally, she whispered, I'm sorry. I studied her for a long moment. And then, just as softly, I said, I don't care. I stepped back, gripping the doorframe, my heart steady. Go home, Corinne. She stared at me, eyes searching for something, anger, forgiveness, anything. But I had nothing left to give. I shut the door. And for the first time in 6 months, I felt free. I didn't move right away after shutting the door. My hand lingered on the handle, my body still tense, as if expecting another knock, another plea, another desperate attempt to pull me back into her world. But nothing came. No shouting. No more begging. Just silence. I should have felt relief. After all, I had just done what I had been preparing for since the moment I walked away. I had faced her. I had shut her out. And for the first time in a long time, I had been the one in control. And yet, my fingers curled into a fist at my side as I let out a slow breath. Why didn't it feel like enough? I turned away from the door, running a hand through my hair. The air in my apartment suddenly felt too thick, pressing in on me like a weight I hadn't noticed before. I moved toward the kitchen, grabbed a glass from the cabinet, and filled it with water. My hands weren't shaking, but there was something else. Something I couldn't quite place. I took a slow sip, my mind spinning. Corinne had searched for me for 6 months. That fact alone should have given me some kind of satisfaction. Shouldn't it? She was the one who had destroyed everything, and yet she had been the one left searching, the one chasing a ghost. I had imagined her looking for me, calling old friends, checking places we used to go together, crafting whatever sob stories she needed to get information. And now, after all that time, After all that effort, she had finally found me, only to realize I wasn't the man she used to know. A bitter smirk tugged at my lips as I set the glass down on the counter. No, I wasn't the same man. The old Elliot would have let her in. The old Elliot would have listened, even if it killed him, would have let her spin her web of explanations, searching for even the smallest reason to believe her. But that Elliot was dead. I had buried him the night I packed my bags and left without looking back. And yet, I found myself pacing the small space of my apartment, a restless energy building in my chest. Something wasn't sitting right. Not the fact that she had found me, that part, I had expected. It was the way she had looked at me. The way her voice had cracked when she said she thought I was dead. I hated that a part of me was still affected by it. Because here's the truth, Corinne was a liar. A manipulator. A woman who had spent years perfecting the art of deception. I had seen it in the way she had covered her tracks, in the way she had gaslit me into thinking I was crazy whenever I questioned her. And yet, when she had stood there on my doorstep, she had looked real. Genuine. I shook my head, shoving the thought away before it could take root. No, I wasn't doing this. I wasn't letting her inside my head again. I needed air. Grabbing my jacket, I headed for the door. I hesitated for half a second before opening it, half expecting to still find her standing there. But she was gone. Good. I stepped outside, letting the cool night air wash over me as I shoved my hands into my pockets. The streets were quiet, the soft hum of distant traffic the only sound in the air. I had chosen this neighborhood for a reason, because it was forgettable. A place where no one asked questions, where people came and went without notice. It was exactly what I had needed to disappear. But now she had found me. I didn't know what that meant yet, if it meant anything at all. Maybe she would give up. Maybe she would realize that whatever closure she was looking for, she wasn't going to get it from me. Or maybe this was just the beginning. The thought sent a slow chill down my spine. Because if there was one thing I knew about Corinne, it was that she never let go of something she wanted. And I had a sinking feeling she wasn't done with me yet. I walked aimlessly, my feet moving on autopilot, but my mind was still trapped in that moment, Corinne standing at my door, her voice shaking as she said she thought I was dead. I hated that it was still echoing in my head. Hated that after all these months of silence, a few simple words could make my chest feel tight again. The night air was crisp, cool against my skin, but it did little to clear my head. The city had been my refuge, a place where no one knew me, where I could become someone new. I had chosen it carefully, far enough from the life I had left behind that I could pretend, for a little while, that I had never even existed as Elliot Garrison, the devoted husband, the trusting fool. For 6 months, I had lived in quiet anonymity. No past, no baggage, just the simple routine of a man who wanted nothing more than to be left alone. And yet, in a single evening, that fragile peace had been shattered. I passed a row of dimly lit storefronts, the neon signs buzzing faintly in the darkness. The streets were nearly empty at this hour, the few people who lingered lost in their own worlds, just like me. I kept walking, my hands shoved deep into my jacket pockets, my mind replaying every second of my last conversation with Corinne. She had looked smaller somehow, more fragile than I remembered. It should have been satisfying, seeing her unsettled for once. But instead, it left me with an unease I couldn't shake. Why now? Why, after all this time, had she suddenly shown up? It didn't make sense. If she had truly believed I was dead, if she had thought I had vanished off the face of the earth, why had she been so determined to find me? The answer gnawed at me, whispering at the edges of my thoughts. I turned a corner, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. I hadn't realized where my feet had taken me until I saw the sign, a small, worn-out cafe, the kind that stayed open late but never had many customers. I had only been here a handful of times, usually when I needed to be anywhere but my apartment. I stepped inside, the door jingling softly as I entered. The barista barely glanced at me, too busy scrolling through his phone to care about the lone customer at this hour. I ordered a black coffee, something to keep my hands busy, and took a seat in the farthest booth, my back to the wall. Old habits. The coffee was bitter, but I barely tasted it. My fingers drummed against the side of the mug as my thoughts spiraled deeper. I needed to stop thinking about her. I had already won. I had left. I had started over. I had taken back control of my life in a way I never thought possible. And yet, the way she had looked at me, the way her voice had cracked, what if she really had changed? I clenched my jaw, pushing the thought away before it could sink its teeth into me. People like Corinne didn't change. They adapted. She hadn't come looking for me because she regretted what she had done. She had come looking for me because she had lost control of the story and Corinne couldn't stand not being in control. That was the real reason she was here. It had to be. I exhaled slowly, rolling my shoulders, forcing myself to shake off the tension. It didn't matter anymore. I had said my piece. I had shut the door in her face. She had no power over me now. And yet, as I sat there in the dim light of the cafe, staring into my untouched coffee, I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling settling in my gut. Corinne never did anything without a reason. And something told me this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't sleep that night. I tried God, but my mind wouldn't shut off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Corinne standing at my door. Her lips parted like she was on the verge of saying something that never came out. The way she looked at me, as if she barely recognized the man in front of her, sent a strange, crawling sensation up my spine. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't regret. Those emotions had been burned out of me months ago. But it was something I didn't want to admit. I should have ignored it. I should have woken up, gone about my day, and let the memory of her knocking on my door fade like all the others. But I didn't. Instead, I sat in my darkened apartment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the low hum of the city outside my window. My phone sat untouched on the nightstand, like a relic from a past life. I had changed my number the moment I left, made sure there was no way she could reach me. And yet, here she was, finding me anyway. That should have been enough proof that she wasn't done with me yet. By sunrise, I had made my decision. I needed to know what she really wanted. Not because I cared. Not because I wanted her back. But because something about this didn't add up, and I wasn't going to let her catch me off guard again. So, I did something I hadn't done in 6 months. I went looking for her. The last place I ever expected to see Corinne again was in a bookstore. But that's exactly where I found her. It wasn't intentional. I had spent the morning doing my usual routine. Coffee at a corner cafe, a walk through the city, anything to clear my mind. But then, as I turned down a quiet street, something made me stop. There she was. She didn't see me at first, too lost in whatever book she was flipping through. She stood near a window, the morning light catching the strands of her hair, making her look almost normal, like the woman I had once loved. But I knew better. I watched her for a moment, debating. I could leave. I could turn around and pretend this never happened, let her think she had been the one to make the last move. But that uneasy feeling in my gut hadn't gone away, and the only way to get rid of it was to face her. So, I walked inside. The bell above the door chimed softly, and her head snapped up. The moment she saw me, something flickered across her face. Not surprise. Not relief. Something closer to hesitation. "Elliot," she breathed. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She closed the book in her hands, setting it aside like she had already forgotten it. "What are you doing here?" A smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth. "Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing." She swallowed, glancing around the store as if looking for an escape route. "I told you to go home," I continued, my voice calm, even. "And yet, here you are." She hesitated, then squared her shoulders, like she was preparing for a fight. "You don't get to disappear and then act like I'm the one who's doing something wrong." I raised an eyebrow. "No? Because last I checked, I wasn't the one who lied. I wasn't the one who—" I stopped myself, shaking my head. "You know what? It doesn't matter. Just tell me why you came looking for me." Her lips parted slightly, like she had been ready to argue but wasn't expecting me to be so direct. For a second, just a second, I saw something raw flash across her face. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. "I need to talk to you," she admitted finally. "Why?" She hesitated. She shook her head, letting out a sharp breath. "Because I never got the chance to explain." I laughed. A real, humorless laugh. "Explain," I repeated, crossing my arms. "Corinne, there's nothing left to explain. I saw the messages. I saw the photos. What exactly do you think you can say to change any of that?" She flinched, just slightly, but I caught it. She knew. She knew there was no justifying what she had done. And yet, she was still here. I studied her, searching her face for any sign of a hidden motive. She was up to something, I knew that much. The Corinne I had married didn't waste time on lost causes. She didn't chase after things unless she thought she could win. So why was she still chasing me? She exhaled, running a hand through her hair. "You don't have to forgive me," she said finally. "I don't expect that. But I need you to understand, I shook my head. "I don't need to understand anything." She looked up at me, her eyes glassy with something I refused to believe was real emotion. "I'm not the same person I was when you left." I scoffed. "Yeah? And what person are you now?" She bit her lip, hesitating again. And that's when it hit me. She was afraid. Not of me. Not of confrontation. But of something else. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. You didn't come here just for closure, I said, watching her closely. You're hiding something. Her breath caught. I had her. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if debating whether or not to tell me the truth. And then, barely above a whisper, she said, I need your help, Elliot. The words hung in the air between us, heavier than anything she had said before. I felt my stomach twist. Because no matter how much I hated her, no matter how much I had sworn I would never let her back in, something about the way she said those words made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This wasn't just about us anymore. And whatever it was only the beginning. Her words hung in the air between us, weighty and uncertain. I need your help, Elliot. 6 months ago, I might have cared. 6 months ago, I might have still been the man who thought Corinne's problems were my problems, that fixing what was broken was my responsibility. But I wasn't that man anymore. I studied her carefully, looking for the manipulation, the angle, the lie hidden behind her plea. But for the first time in our entire history, I saw something different in her eyes, something close to exhaustion. Not the exhaustion of someone who had lost control, but the exhaustion of someone who had finally accepted the truth. She exhaled, rubbing her temple as if trying to find the right words. I didn't come here expecting you to take me back, she admitted. I know that's not possible. I know I ruined everything. I leaned against the nearby bookshelf, crossing my arms. So what do you want? She hesitated, then looked down at her hands. I need to fix myself, she murmured. And I needed to see you, just once, before I did. I blinked. That was the last thing I expected her to say. I don't need your forgiveness, she continued. I don't even deserve it. But I spent 6 months trying to find you, thinking that if I could just explain everything, if I could just make you understand why I did what I did, then maybe I'd feel better about it. But now that I'm standing here. She shook her head, laughing softly, almost bitterly. I realized that no explanation will ever be enough. I broke something in you, something that can't be repaired. I didn't respond. Because she was right. I've spent so much time trying to outrun what I did, she admitted. Trying to convince myself that if I just told you how sorry I was, it would somehow undo everything. But it won't. I exhaled slowly. No, it won't. She swallowed hard, nodding. I'm leaving town, she said finally. For good. I need to get away from everything, from the life I destroyed. I need to figure out who I am without hurting anyone else. I watched her closely, searching for any sign of deception, any attempt to manipulate me into giving her something pity, closure, another chance. But all I saw was acceptance. She had finally accepted that there was no fixing this. I let out a slow breath. Good. She flinched slightly at my response, but nodded. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled something out, my wedding ring. The one I had left behind when I disappeared. I kept it, she said softly. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I held on to it long enough, it would mean I hadn't really lost you. She extended her hand, offering it back to me. I stared at it for a long moment before finally taking it, the metal cool against my palm. But it didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. It was a relic from another life, one I had no intention of returning to. I clenched my fist around it, then slowly exhaled and placed it on the nearest bookshelf. It doesn't matter anymore, I said simply. She swallowed hard, but didn't argue. For the first time since this entire mess started, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel resentment. I didn't even feel relief. I just felt done. This was the closure I never thought I'd get. Not because she had given it to me, but because I had finally taken it for myself. I looked at her one last time. Goodbye, Corinne. She inhaled sharply at the finality of my words, then nodded, stepping back. And then, without another word, she turned and walked away. I watched her go, waiting for some kind of regret to hit me, some last-minute second-guessing. But it never came. Instead, I walked outside, took a deep breath, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. For the first time in months, I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't haunted by the past. I was free. And that, I realized, was the only ending I ever needed.